Hello, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. My name is Chris Tyversky. I'm joined by Jeremy Sturdahl, and thank you for joining the next edition of the TWG Plus webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about prior year, PPY. Are you ready? Jeremy and I are, just to give you a little bit of background, are both consultants with TWG Plus. I've been with TWG Plus for approximately 5 years now. But prior to joining TWG Plus, I was a director of admission at Drew University in New Jersey, also at Pace University in New York. So very much looking today at PPY from a enrollment perspective and from a communications perspective. As I heard about PPY, I think I thought about it in the same way as a lot of you probably did, wondering how it was going to impact us as enrollment managers. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, again thanks for joining us. My name is Jeremy Sturdahl and I'm in my 4th year with TWG Plus working with clients in search and publication strategic enrollment. And I've got about 10 years of higher ed experience, having worked in admissions and financial aid in Johnson & Wales and another institution or two along the way. So really looking forward to the changes that I think we can help out with in terms of PPY and talking a little bit about it today, and as we go along, looking forward to seeing the feedback we get. So again, thanks for joining us.
So today we are our goal for today is to go through a brief overview of PPY and early FAFSA filing, what is it, go over some of the pros and cons that we can see coming up, hopefully talk a little bit about the anticipated effects on recruitment and financial aid, talk a little bit about how schools are preparing. We actually ran a survey that we'll share our results for, and talk a little bit about what you can do with it. Just to set the expectations up front, we hope to keep you for about 30 minutes, and we're not going to be getting into financial aid strategy today. So if you came on looking for financial aid strategy, that's not specifically what we want to talk about today. Today we want to talk more about the general effect PPY and early FAFSA filing may have in the landscape, and specifically from the admissions and enrollment marketing side. What are schools doing about it? How are they reacting? How are they communicating? And how are they preparing to make sure that they and their students are on the same page about PPY and early filing? So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Jeremy to talk a little bit and give a brief overview of what PPY and early filing are.
All right, thanks, Ty. And as Ty mentioned, brief, because I think you guys probably have an idea of what it is by now and maybe what it means. So I won't belabor the point, certainly. But basically, of course, the bottom line is that students and their parents can now file financial aid on October 1st. And so that's, and what we'll talk about today is what that really means. So just very briefly, 3 months earlier than previous, students can file financial aid, hence the term prior year, because as you know, your financial aid forms are always filed using the prior year's financial information, and now we're using the year prior to that, hence the double prior year. What's interesting is that students who are entering in the class of 2016, which actually includes my son who's graduating tomorrow from high school, we filled out our FAFSA earlier this year, and then we'll again fill out the FAFSA at the end of this year, and we'll use the same tax returns. So I find that kind of interesting, but also could be problematic depending on folks' income situations. ICERs will be delivered to schools within 5 business days of FAFSA completion. So that's as of October 1st. So that's been a promise from the government that they will deliver those ICERs back. So that information will be there very soon after those early FAFSA filers. And then within the same time frame as we're used to in the new year, students will still receive their SAR and EFC soon after that. So that's a little bit dependent on completed information, of course, et cetera, but it'll still be in a 1 to 2 week time frame as we're used to. So everything's going to be pretty much the same in terms of filing and sending it back from the government just 3 months earlier. Now, moving into what that means, so just a little retiree there for you. Miss that guy. There's some major benefits to the FAFSA changes, and overall, I think they're positive for everybody. And people can file a FAFSA now using actual numbers, not estimates. The IRS data retrieval thing. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but when you file a FAFSA now, if you filed your taxes at least 6 weeks prior to filing the FAFSA, you actually don't have to populate all the numbers yourself. It'll populate from the IRS to the FAFSA, as long as you've got a 6-week or so gap in between taxes and FAFSA filing. So now that's going to be possible for most people. Like in my case, as I referred to before, I filed the FAFSA only about 2 weeks after I filed taxes, so I didn't have that option. But now with folks having filed taxes well in advance, using prior year, it'll make filing the FAFSA a lot easier. So it's going to be a good talking point for financial aid folks there. And verifications, because of that, verifications should go down. We're also going to, with the PPY, better align admissions and financial aid processes so that when you're starting to accept students, you're also starting to get them at least a preliminary look potentially at financial aid. And it's going to be good for families because they're going to have a more realistic or a more upfront picture of their financial aid situation going in. Let's see. Ty, do you want to take challenges?
Yep. Some of the challenges that we've been hearing about, and we've already been at several regional conferences hearing about this right from the mouths of admissions and enrollment folks, and some financial aid folks too. One, are financial aid offices ready to even be thinking about financial aid for the following year's students as early as October? So is the financial aid office ready to start receiving ICERs, let alone do anything with them? Two is really from the admissions point of view, aid is something that we talk about frequently, but often on a very surface level early in the recruitment process. So during search, during open houses, college fairs, you're talking about the amount of aid you might give. You're talking about scholarships and encouraging folks to eventually file FAFSA. But as we know, fall is traditionally a time that we're talking about, let's file your application and let's worry about financial aid later. So our admissions office is ready to get more in-depth about financial aid questions in October and November, especially your recruiters, road runners, your new hires, the people that you've got out on the road. How well cross-trained are they really to talk about financial aid? Is a roadrunner ready for a family to show up at a mid-October college fair and say, here's my SAR, I just printed it off, I've already filed my financial aid, what do I do with it? Will some admission counselors even know what that is, or have they actually physically seen the form before? So how do you retrain your recruiters and your admission counselors to be ready to handle those questions off-cycle? And then finally, in terms of aid and general packaging, how engaged is the rest of the institution with you? Are the board, are the president on board with setting tuition figures early or estimating tuition figures early, so that if you wanted to do anything with those early ICERs, if you wanted to try packaging early, would you be ready? It's a much bigger conversation than just the admissions and financial aid offices. So how well engaged do you have your supporting parties to be able to make that stuff happen? And then, Jeremy, do you want to talk about some of the uncertainties?
Okay, so sorry, I struggled to find the mute button there. So there are a lot of things we don't know, and folks sitting on campuses don't know, and we don't know from a marketing point of view, which is that just how many families will do this. Will October 1st come with crickets or with an influx of FAFSA filers? We don't know that. We think there might be more professional judgments. That's an uncertainty, but it seems to be a fair prediction in that, if we're going back an extra year for financial information, income changes one way or the other. So there could be a lot of PJ action going on once you get those the initial filings done. Uncertainties also within peer groups as schools. Talking to a lot of the schools that we work with, they're either talking to other schools that are in their peer group, and they're all kind of trying to go do the same thing, or they're just sitting back and wondering what their competitors are doing. So that may be right now, you may be sitting there wondering what are our competition schools doing about this, and do we get ahead of them, or do we respond to what they do? Will early financial aid action, if you take any, will that, you have to, of course, figure out discounting later. If you end up awarding a bunch of aid up front, does that affect your ability to do so later in the process? Timelines, of course, families are going to be getting information sooner, so does that make them more demanding up front rather than waiting until the springtime? That's always an X factor. But again, that goes back to the first one. How many are going to actually do it? You figure if they're getting in early, they're going to expect early. And are privates more able to deal with this? Are they more nimble because of institutional flexibility rather than a public school that may be looking a year or two out before making changes, or not? So I think the competitive landscape is very much in question here in terms of how this might affect it. And again, back to the competition between schools, some schools will do something up front, some schools will do a little, some will do a lot, and we'll see that in the survey results as we go through in a minute here. There's really no right answer right now, and the uncertainty is who's going to do what. So on campus, go ahead.
So as Jeremy said, we really wanted to look at this, and the genesis of this was really us thinking about how we could best advise our clients and figure out how to help them communicate about PPY. And the first step was really figuring out what the competitive landscape looked like. What are other schools doing? So TWG Plus, we started out by making some phone calls, just talking to people in general, and we were amazed by the broad spectrum of answers. Everything from, this is a game changer, to, I just don't have time to think about it right now. At the time, May 1st was still coming, deposits were still rolling in, people were knee-deep in thinking about admitted student events and trying to make the class, and thinking, what, this is months away, October feels a world away, and pretty much everything in between. So what we decided to do was to put out a survey to ask some basic questions among our client base, and we'll actually be extending this survey afterwards, and we'll gladly share the link with all of you if you'd like to fill it out, or if you'd like to see the results as the larger report comes through. But initially, for the survey, we had 37 participants with a pretty good mix of private and public, about 70-30, all admissions and marketing professionals. We really, again, wanted to look at this from the enrollment manager's desk. Now, naturally, some of our VPs and deans that we spoke with also do have some influence over the financial aid practice, but our goal was to really keep everything focused more on communication, admission practice, and general thoughts about the potential impact of PPY and early FAFSA filing on the admissions process and on the yield process. So as we go through the survey results, it's challenging to be interactive over webinar, but you do have a button where you can ask questions. And by all means, as we're going through the following slides and talking a little bit more about the survey results, please feel free to ask some questions, and we will answer them as best we can as we go through. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Jeremy to start off talking about the survey itself.
Okay, so jumping right into some of the survey questions, along with just hard data, we elicited some quotes and anecdotal responses from folks as well. And so one of the things was, I want to see how this unfolds before making any moves. So there's a couple of approaches that we've seen, and one is proactive, and we're going to do this, 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 and this, and then the other is more reactive, is that, hey, let's just see what happens. And then, I don't think we'll get killed by it if we just wait it out. So those are the two main approaches we saw, and so that's one of the things that one of the themes that came up. And so the first question was, are you planning to release financial aid packages earlier than in prior years? And overwhelmingly, our respondents said yes, absolutely. A small number said nope, they're just going to wait until the regular time, and that's that. And so it'd be interesting to see what the internal considerations were, just whether financial aid just was not going to be prepared, whether it just doesn't fit their recruitment cycle, or just, again, a full-out wait and see what happens. But for the most part, everybody's saying, yep, so the information is going to be there. We got to get those packages out to our families. So that was interesting in how overwhelming that is. Okay, a quote for the next question.
And some people out there thought that being able to file early and get packages out there is going to really change everything, because students are going to be making decisions earlier. Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind just flipping back. Oh, there we go.
I'm not sure what happened there.
There you go. So as we just saw, people are going to be releasing packages early on an overwhelming number, percentage of those surveyed. Let's look a little bit about when. So some people are going to start as early as October. There's a small number that plan by mid-October, end of October to be releasing, but overwhelmingly, that November, December time frame is going to be when things are happening. So when we think about this, you're really talking about getting packages out a good 3 to 4 months ahead of when they normally would have. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into making a decision like this, and we're not necessarily making a recommendation that you do offer, specifically October, November, December. But what we want you to think about is, or just put out there is, if your competitors are able to get their packages out early, how much earlier than you are they getting them out? How does that affect you, and how are you going to combat that? Or vice versa, if you're able to get them out earlier, how do you want to present that, and how can you really maximize that advantage? But definitely be aware that there are a large number of institutions that are planning on trying to get things out at least a little bit early before the new year, before the holidays, so that folks can sit down over the dinner table over some as early as Thanksgiving, but certainly many over the New Year's break, to be able to start looking at the finances of education in a much deeper way than they have during that period ever before.
And of course, it's not just financial aid packages. There's a trickle-down effect, right? So, one quote we got was, it'll prompt us to consider, and the caps are original, everything we do through a different lens. So that the trickle down of that is you have the potential to have to change everything you do in your admissions cycle. One of the things to consider is, are you changing your application deadlines based on PPY and early FAFSA filing? And this one is the complete opposite, in that most schools are saying, well, either their deadlines are early enough that they don't have to worry about it, or they're just not going to change it. So the potential is there that a student will have their EFC, their government aid, before they are even accepted. And that's, the overwhelming case here is that, schools are not going to move up their deadlines. Now, we have talked to some schools. I talked to one particular school who said, look, we may move up a month, but we may wait a year and see if anybody else does. So again, that's one of those things where, the competitive landscape may dictate the answer to that, because I think the answer to this question may change next year as opposed to this year. As we alluded to earlier, if you change your admissions deadlines, as you know, you're changing a lot in the office and who does what and when. So moving up deadlines could be self-defeating if you don't have the staff there to process all the information, right? So I think this is something that may shift looking ahead to the next starting class in 2017, but that remains to be seen. Next question was, will you release admissions decisions earlier than normal? And again, overwhelmingly no. However, a bigger chunk said yes here. So while deadlines won't move up, more schools are considering or going ahead and sending those decisions out a little earlier than they would have before, so about a quarter. And again, this is something that may shift as everybody gets used to it, but it is very interesting to see that while deadlines won't move, those admissions letters will go out a little earlier in a lot of cases.
So, that has prompted a big discussion about, again, how will this affect the communication and the dialogue between schools and their prospective or admitted students. And, I thought this was a great quote, and that's that, the transition from relationship building to talking about cost and real numbers, and sort of from the get to know you to the can I really afford you phase, is going to happen a lot earlier in many cases than it has in the past. And we wanted to look at what people are already starting to do about the nature of that conversation. So one of the questions we asked is, will PPY and early filing change the way you talk about financial aid during your recruitment events? And by and large, people are saying yes, they are. 87% of people said that they are going to talk about aid differently than they have in the past, and 13% said they wouldn't. I would argue that if you're in that 13%, you might want to look at getting into the darker side of the circle there, because even if you don't change a thing, others around you are going to. And you have to anticipate that parents are going to ask questions and your staff needs to have an answer that if you are maintaining a hard line on when you normally do things and you aren't changing anything, you're going to need a good positioning statement to explain that. So seriously think about, as events start coming up, whether you're on the road or whether it's on-campus events or just even during tours, what's your new line or what's your new position on the whole early filing thing? And follow up on that. We also said, for those, has anybody already started talking about it? So now, as of May 18th, or even earlier when we put out the survey in early May, have you already started talking about it? This response is misleading because we asked people to delve deeper into it. About 60% of people said they haven't talked about it at all. We were actually surprised to hear that 40% said that they already had this early, started talking about it. We were sort of excited about that, like, wow, some people are really on their game. When we went a little bit deeper into it and asked them, how were you talking about it? In what way have you communicated with parents, students already about the changes this early on? Only 2 of the respondents had actually had anything that we would consider formal communication, where they've changed it on their admission website and they've changed language on their financial aid website. The rest have mentioned it, but that's either been in individual conversations with students or parents, it's been in side conversations or when they were on a campus talking to a guidance counselor, that sort of thing, but no what I would consider official broadband communication. So this number is actually a little bit skewed. I would argue that of our respondents, only about 5 to 10% have actually talked in a meaningful way or in a broad way with their prospects about the coming changes for the year. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and a lot of folks are starting to think about exactly when they're going to be making those communications. And right now, you can see when we ask them when they plan to start, most people are putting it off. The largest amount said they really don't know yet exactly what the plan is going to be. They're not sure when they're going to start. You can see that very few have plans to start this month or next month. Later in the summer, you're starting to see a few in July, but most are looking at probably during the fall recruitment season. And we'll talk a little bit about whether we think this is a good idea or not. But if you are in that group that has not started talking about it, don't be nervous. You are not alone. But I would also say you have a lot of potential to get ahead of the pack and start formulating your message and getting it out there before the rest of the market does.
Absolutely. We had a couple of questions, and one of them dovetails here with this next quote, in that I think it will accelerate the admission enrollment process and timeline for students and heighten the expectations of families for a faster response. And that's a great point. We do have to wait and see if that bears out. And one of the questions we received was, are schools anticipating an increase or decrease in early decision activity with financial aid information in hand? And from it wasn't one of the questions we asked specifically, but from anecdotal conversations, that time frame between October 1st and the typical early decision date in mid-November is tight enough that we haven't talked to any schools individually that are going to change that. But the quote here is relevant in that, does that mean parents are going to expect more? Even if it's not earlier decision, are they going to want earlier decisions? Are they going to take more advantage of that early decision deadline? So that reaction from the student side remains to be seen to a degree.
So, we can see now some of, what we know what's happening. We know, the facts of what PPY is, and we know the new FAFSA filing deadline. And now we've got a sense of sort of what some people through our survey are starting to do about it. What we wanted to talk a little bit more about is what you should be doing. How can you maximize your communications, and what should you be doing at this point from an admissions and communications perspective to get ready for it? So, you know, brace yourselves. It is coming, and I promise there'll be no Game of Thrones spoilers during the rest of this presentation. So in talking with folks and what they're doing, again, some anecdotal information coming out of the different offices. Some folks anticipate that it may throw reporting off a little bit this year. They think that there may be some deposits coming in sooner as parents find out earlier whether they can or cannot afford their child's first choice institution. Certainly, the one impact that everybody is anticipating is that the nature of the communication flow is going to have to change. You know, if you have, there used to be the carrot that used to dangle, right? You know, apply in October, November, December, and then, you know, file your FAFSA after you're done with that, but get me your application first. And then I'll get you a decision, and then, you know, we'll start talking about trying to woo you and make you become a student, you know, and trying to yield you. But we always knew that people were sort of on the hook until that February, March timeframe to get their financial aid package. Well, what if all of that now moves forward and sort of the big reveal, if you will, is done in some cases, as we saw earlier, as early as prior to the new year? That's going to be a much longer communication flow, a much longer yield flow, and the nature of your discussions may well be different. And it's going to be tricky to try to keep a student on the hook for a longer period of time. You know, but other folks said, you know, I'm not going to change a thing. Again, this year we're going to wait. We would not recommend that, but that is, you know, something that some folks are going to do. So some of our recommendations for you to kind of go through things that you can be doing even as early as right now with relatively little thought and planning, and then some things that you can do a little bit longer term that may require a little bit more depth and a little bit more investment of time on your piece or on your place. Jeremy, can you advance, please? You know, the first thing is, you know, your search communications, you know, summer search is going to be coming up shortly. So certainly, you know, if you traditionally have communications going out early about affordability, about return on investment, about financing in college education, we would encourage you to put some message or change the message about financial aid in there. Keep the basic ROI information the same, but certainly let students and parents know that, you know, as the government is looking to make the affordability conversation easier for them, you are too. That you are bought into that idea, and that you are also looking out for the students, and that, especially if you do plan on releasing packages early, start taking advantage of that moment now. Let parents know that you are a responsive school, that you're a school that is looking out for their best interest, because really PPY and early filing were designed for the parents much more so than the institutions. Two, you know, anywhere that you have financial aid data on your website, whether you have net price calculators on your admissions and financial aid websites, those are low-hanging fruit. You know, go out there onto your website, see where you've got your deadlines or where you've got your general language currently about Jan 1, and move those deadlines up, you know, and put a statement out there that, you know, eases parents' nervousness maybe, or maybe try to talk it up, get parents excited about it, especially if you plan on doing things early. But remember that you've got a lot of information out there right now that parents and students are looking at. You need to make sure that as they're searching you on the web, all of your information is updated and ready to go. And we would recommend doing that stuff earlier as opposed to later. Looking at your yield strategies, if you have a yield communication plan, you're going to need to start that, we believe, earlier. Or certainly the nature of those conversations is likely going to change, the order of those conversations. You're going to be having, if you're releasing your financial aid packages early, there's going to be a lot more bottom line type talk early in the process now. You're going to need to establish affordability early to stay in that conversation. If, you know, if a student's being accepted to 8 schools, they can now figure out which ones are realistic and which ones aren't, potentially by January, February. So it's not a matter of keeping them on the hook for that big reveal of the financial aid package. It's now reveal the package, is make sure that they understand that, yes, I can make this happen, and then from there figure out how to make sure that you are the best choice, or that you are the best choice among the affordable options. So it does sort of change the order of your conversation a little bit. It may even change the way that you handle your admitted student events. They may start earlier. You may start doing, instead of FAFSA workshops in the winter, you may be doing financial aid, actual come in, sit down, talk one-on-one about packages as a yield strategy starting in January, February, whereas those may have typically been later conversations. We've actually heard that folks will be bringing financial aid staff to not do general presentations at fall open houses, late fall open houses, but potentially to be ready to review financial aid packages one-on-one in November or even early December. So again, the nature of your communications with yield could start very, very early. If you are somebody who's going to go all in, and you're an institution that plans on, you're on rolling admissions, you're going to not hold that first round of decision letters, you're going to start letting students know early they've been admitted, and you're going to follow up with early packaging, you may want to prime the pump early during your search now. And this is something that's a little bit more, you need to give a little bit more thought to. But if you're going to use this to your advantage, then perhaps consider adding a mailer or some kind of standalone financial aid piece to your search plan, to your pre-application plan, to show students that you are really trying to react early to this. You are going to be at the forefront of this change, and that you think that you can make this benefit the student greatly. So really use financial aid as even more of a selling point than you have early to encourage early application. Again, this is slightly different than normal, but I think that in year one especially, if you plan to be ahead of the pack, then you might as well get the most out of that lead before people change in years 2, 3, and 4 or down the line. So maybe consider, adding a standalone communication just about early filing, PPY, and about financial aid, whereas that may not currently exist beyond a simple email in your search plan.
Yeah, and even if you're not one of those, even if you're not going all in and jumping ahead of it, I think those couple of points are great in that you still have to be prepared on the admission side to address it and to know how to respond to it, to have the facts in hand of what's available when, from not only from your school but from the government. So even if you're not going to get ahead of it with specific messaging about it or early packaging or early decisions, just having everybody ready to know how to answer those questions is going to be key. Your internal staffing. So,
and I think too, to sort of follow up on that, Jeremy, this year one of the big questions is how many parents actually know that they can do this. So beyond sort of maximizing your positioning, you can also just do sort of a PSA type communication. Did you even know this was a possibility? And sort of play that consultative role with parents and trying to educate, especially if you're a school that deals a lot with first-generation students. Looking at this piece as educational for them might be worthwhile. And looking down the line, if yield is going to move up and it looks like you're going to be doing early packaging, potentially releasing admission decisions earlier than normal, then do you need to move your search cycle up? Do you need to really ramp up your communications with prospects and especially with your inquiries during, next spring or even starting now over the summer? Do you need to ramp things up earlier and more aggressively than normal? Because it's entirely possible.
Yeah, no, sorry, but that's definitely one thing that those are thoughts that I think are starting to come on now that schools have really gotten to process this information. So more and more lately, I've been talking to schools who are saying, yeah, we're really thinking about our junior search in 2017 right now. And, so schools that were a little more casual about it, or even schools that didn't do a junior search, are now really putting some thought into what they're going to do in the new year, because there's a lot to be gained, I think, in that April-May timeframe when junior year is wrapping up, and now getting accepted and getting a financial aid package is just right around the corner.
And then finally, training really working on cross-training your admission counselors if you haven't done so already, or ramping up their cross-training when it comes to talking about financial aid. The one thing that none of us can control is the way that students, parents, counselors, the greater marketplace is going to react to these changes. As much control as we'd like to think that we can have by controlling our timelines, our outbound communications, the one thing that we don't know how to anticipate this year is how aggressive are parents and students going to be in asking more intense questions earlier? Will a lot of them have different customer service expectations from you? If they apply early, get financial aid packages from 2 or 3 other schools and you haven't gotten yours out yet, how are they going to react, especially early in the process when counselors are on the road? So, cross-training, and even if counselors are on the road and you're running on a skeleton staff in your office, how well are your main greeters and the folks that are staffing the phones in the office ready to handle more aggressive questions? So definitely make sure that you prepare your staff at every level for how to be ready, at least, should people become more inquisitive or border on aggressive. Hey, where's my financial aid package? Or hey, why do I have it from so-and-so but not from you? Or can we sit down and talk about this even though it's only November? So the more cross-training you can do for your staff, the better off you'll be across the board.
Yes.
So again, there's a lot of different aspects of this that I think relate to communication and that relate to training. It's a big question mark year. There's going to be a lot of potential changes, and it could be that things happen that nobody's expecting. But these are some of the ideas that we think that everybody can jump on and start thinking about immediately, over the course of the next month or so, and even start implementing over the summer to really help get you ready for when things get real, starting in September and October. So
Great.
With that,
so Ty, I'm going to address one of the questions that was asked because Ty kind of touched on it, which was staffing. And it's interesting that you can't automatically just hire staff to address something like this in state in public or private schools. So I have a couple of questions I'm going to answer real quick. But if you would go ahead and feel free to type in any other questions you may have at this point. But as far as staffing goes, one of the comments we got from a number of folks was that this won't affect staffing so much in the short term anyway, as much as the new order I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is all about overtime and how many hours staff can work before having to be paid overtime and those rules. So from what we've heard, a lot of folks are a lot more concerned about that and how that affects staffing rather than PPY, because I think everyone will adjust in their own way to this. Whereas there's a much bigger elephant in the room in terms of that overtime rule. So that's what we've heard as far as that goes. Also got a question about Pell and federal loan amounts. If you can get an EFC back and all that information back, will you also have 2017, 2018 Pell and Stafford information back? The answer to that is probably not, as we found out, because those numbers rely on congressional approval, and there is no anticipation that Congress will do anything any sooner for PPY in terms of approving numbers for Pell and the loan amounts. So that's one challenge you have to face, is that those numbers will still come out when they normally come out. So you're going to have to go ahead and estimate if you can based on the prior year.
And that actually, Jeremy, just to dovetail on that, in our conversations, aside from the survey, but independent conversations with several state institutions, there's a lot of concern from many of the publics that we've spoken to about, their inability to really act on this at all in a positive way, because either they're worried that their state governments won't get, set tuitions and help them set state aid any earlier because of this. So they feel, a lot of the publics are a little concerned from what we've heard so far, those we've spoken to, that they're not going to be able to jump up nearly as far as their private competitors are, who are going to be using, significant institutional aid and whose boards and presidents may be more responsive to setting numbers for future years. So it's year one especially is going to be very interesting in terms of what's actually ready and what's not.
Another question we got was, have we heard about schools moving their scholarship deadlines up concerning PPY? So that's another one where we've gotten resounding not this year, along the lines of moving up admissions deadlines. So schools or admissions folks who initially thought, well, maybe we'll move it up, or, as this first came out, have generally said, well, maybe not this year. So, I don't know, Ty, if you've heard of anybody anecdotally that is going to move it up, but and again, it wasn't a specific survey question, but from what from our discussions, no, nobody's moving those up right now. Will that change in the future? Again, my anticipation is that as this plays out and family expectations change and people become more aware of the October 1st ability to file, that, yeah, I think in future years we'll start to see things slide a little bit, just as a trend. But initially, no, the answer to that is not yet. All right, any other questions, folks? Those are some excellent questions. I'll give you a couple of seconds.
All right, if not,
yep, go ahead.
It doesn't look like we have any further questions. So with that, thank you all very much for taking a half hour, 40 minutes to sit with us today. We hope you found it informative. As I said, we will be in a follow-up communication putting the link to the survey to open it up a little bit more broadly, and then we will share the results of that on our website in the coming months at twgplus.com. And we do have a monthly webinar series. And for June, we're going to be talking about what does Gen Z really think, looking at communicating with the newest generation coming through our doors and coming onto our campuses, and how they communicate, what they communicate about, and sort of what they think about themselves and how that impacts you as enrollment managers. So that'll be on June 22nd. Hope you can join us for that one. And again, thank you very much for your time today. And we hope
a quick note about that is that will include an actual student panel, which is really interesting. So, get folks on there to listen to that. So thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Take care, everyone.